They should have turned back when they found the first pile of bones. It was Tyler who spotted them first, half buried under a tangle of leaves at the base of an old oak. A deer, maybe, or something smaller. The bones were picked clean, too clean, like something had sucked the marrow right out of them. "Man, that's creepy," Jason muttered, nudging one of the longer bones with his boot. It was hollow, light as a bird's. "Coyotes, maybe." "Maybe," said Claire, though she didn't sound convinced. They had been hiking for 6 hours on a lesser-known trail in the Great Smoky Mountains. No marked paths, no fellow hikers, just endless trees, thick fog creeping in through the canopy, and the sound of the wind that sometimes didn't sound like wind at all. They should have turned back, but they didn't. An hour later, they found the cabin. "It's not on the map," Claire said, frowning at the old, wrinkled printout she'd brought along. "Maybe it's one of those old ranger huts," Tyler said, wiping sweat from his brow. He was the leader of the group, always the one pushing for more adventure. "Come on, let's check it out." The cabin looked abandoned, slumped slightly to one side, its roof caved in at the corner, the wood dark and damp. The door hung open, revealing nothing but a black hole. Something about it made Claire's stomach twist. "Nope," she said. "Not a chance. This is horror movie 101. We go in, we die." "Jesus, Claire, it's just an old hut," Jason laughed. But no one moved to go inside. Then the wind picked up, and the trees groaned. Not in the way trees normally do, not in the way branches creak or trunks bend in the wind. It sounded like a voice. "You hear that?" Tyler whispered. They did. It was a low moaning sound, rising and falling, almost like words. But the words were wrong, twisted, as if something deep in the forest was trying to speak but had forgotten how. "We should go back," Claire said, gripping the straps of her backpack tight. "Now." They agreed. No one argued. That was the first real sign something was wrong. 2 hours later, they were back at the bones, the same tree, the same damn pile of picked clean remains. "No, no, no," Jason breathed, turning in a slow circle. "This isn't right." "We must have gotten turned around," Tyler said, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. "The trail loops. It has to." "It doesn't loop." Claire's voice was tight, thin. "We've been going straight." Silence. The wind had stopped. The forest was listening. Then the trees moved. It wasn't obvious at first, just a shadow in the corner of the eye. A slight shift, like the whole forest had inhaled and held its breath. Then a tree in the distance, maybe 30 feet away, shifted. It was small, barely noticeable, but it moved, like it had taken a single step closer. "Run," Claire whispered. They did. The forest changed as they ran. Trees that hadn't been there before loomed suddenly in their path, forcing them to turn, stumble, backtrack. The sky, once a dull gray, was now thick with shifting branches, blocking out what little light remained. And the moaning, that awful, low voice, was louder now, closer. They ran until their legs burned, until Jason tripped and hit the ground hard, knocking the wind out of himself. Claire grabbed his arm, hauled him up. "Tyler!" she started, but Tyler wasn't there. "Oh God!" Jason gasped. "Where is he?" Claire spun in frantic circles. "Tyler! Tyler!" Nothing. Then a sound. Not from Tyler, from the trees, a rustling, a shifting, a wet, hungry sound. And then a whisper, so close it might have been in Claire's ear. "More." Jason grabbed her hand. They ran. They didn't stop until the trees thinned and the sky opened up. The parking lot was right there, their car waiting like a beacon of salvation. Jason sobbed as they scrambled inside, slamming the doors, locking them. Tyler never came out of the woods. They never went back for him. Weeks later, Claire sat awake in her apartment, staring at her wall where the streetlight outside cast long, thin shadows. She could still hear the wind. Sometimes it almost sounded like a voice. Sometimes she thought she could hear Tyler calling her name, but she never looked outside, because sometimes the trees moved. Jake Whitmore had spent years photographing forests, but he had never seen trees move before. Not like this. At first, it was just a curiosity, a trick of the light, maybe. He'd take a picture of a quiet clearing in the Oregon wilderness, check the image, and something would be off. A tree that had been to the left now seemed closer to the center. A shadow stretched in the wrong direction. Just little things. Optical illusion, he muttered to himself. But the more he looked, the more he saw. A week into his solo trip, Jake sat by his cabin going through the day's photos. A shot of the forest in early morning fog. Tall pines standing still and silent. Another shot, barely a minute later. One of the trees had moved. Not swaying, not bending, moved. A good 3 feet to the left where there had been nothing but empty space before. Jake stared at the images, heart thumping. He zoomed in, looking for signs of an edit, a smudge, anything that could explain it. His hands weren't shaking, but something inside him told him they should be. The wind, he muttered, even though there had been none. That night, he dreamed of trees creeping closer while he slept. The next day, Jake set up his camera on a tripod, aimed at the clearing in front of the cabin, and left it running. He wanted proof. He wanted an explanation. He hiked for hours, trying to shake the gnawing unease, but it followed him like a whisper in the back of his mind. When he returned, the camera was still rolling. The memory card was nearly full. He scrolled through the footage. The trees were shifting. Not fast, not sudden. But every few minutes, their positions changed, twisting ever so slightly. The biggest tree, an ancient pine at the center of the clearing, leaned closer, like it was watching the cabin. Jake turned off the camera. The pine was closer than before. He was sure of it now. "Screw this," he muttered, shoving his camera inside. That night, he locked the cabin door. He latched the windows. He told himself he was being paranoid, but something deep in his gut, the same instinct that had kept him alive on risky solo expeditions, told him otherwise. Sometime after midnight, a thump woke him, a heavy, solid sound, like something massive had just settled outside. Jake didn't move. He barely breathed. Then came another thump, closer, and then a slow, creaking sound, wood groaning under pressure. He swallowed hard. The room was pitch dark, but he could feel it, the way the air had changed, the way the shadows felt thicker. He reached out, fumbling for his flashlight, but before he could grab it, another noise came, a whisper, a low, rustling murmur like leaves shifting in the wind. Only there was no wind. Jake grabbed the flashlight and flicked it on. The window showed nothing but blackness, but the door looked warped, like something was pressing against it from the other side, pushing ever so slightly. He stood, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. "Who's there?" No answer, only silence. Then, a single tap on the window. Slow, deliberate. He didn't look. He couldn't, because deep down, he knew. If he turned toward the window, he would see the trees, and they would be closer. Morning came like a slap of cold air. The cabin was silent. Jake sat in the chair by the fireplace, eyes wide, body stiff, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. He hadn't slept. He hadn't dared move. But when he finally worked up the courage to peek outside, the trees were where they had always been. Still, silent, unmoving. Maybe he had imagined it. Maybe exhaustion was playing tricks on him. He tried to laugh, but the sound came out hollow. Shoving his camera into his bag, he decided to pack up and leave. Screw the week-long stay. He needed to get back to civilization. The sun was bright, cutting through the canopy as he walked toward his truck. The gravel crunched underfoot. The wind hummed softly through the trees. Then he noticed something. The path he had driven in on, the one that led back to the highway, it wasn't there. Jake turned in frantic circles, scanning the dense forest around him. The road was gone, not overgrown, not covered by fallen leaves, just gone, as if it had never been there at all. Panic rose in his throat. He turned back toward the cabin, but it too felt wrong. The door was closed now. He was sure he had left it open. Then he saw them, the trees, closer than before. He hadn't blinked.